Skype. Let's talk Brexit with my first guest of this hour, former Foreign Secretary, former leader of the SDP, Lord David Owen. Good morning to you, sir.
Morning.
Now, you've been a long-standing Eurosceptic. You were campaigning along with Vote Leave. You're very much a supporter of that coming up. Just first question, do you think we are ever going to leave the European Union?
Yes, I think we will. I think the view of the British people is they want out, but they want out in a sensible way. They want out preferably by negotiation. And I think that's now the big test of Boris Johnson. Can he negotiate intelligently, strongly, carry the House of Commons? He should not come back with a deal that will be defeated again for the fourth time in the House of Commons. And I think it may be hard to come out with a negotiation. But at this stage, everybody briefs, and everybody briefs their case. And so we're getting a feeling that there isn't the momentum which one got from the Irish Taoiseach and Boris Johnson. Let's see what happens.
Well, this is the beginning of last week, it was looking very negative. By the end of the week after that meeting between Leo Varadkar and Boris Johnson, looking very positive. And then now Michel Barnier on Sunday night was briefing to say, he's the EU's chief negotiator, that actually they were going to need some more concessions from the UK. Now, as more and more concessions, as there's more criticism being mounted against what Boris Johnson has proposed, we don't have that much detail about what it is. But from the details that have come out, it does seem less and less likely that Eurosceptic Tory MPs in particular would be willing to vote for this deal. Is it likely that to get a deal that the EU27 will accept, it's going to be something that simply won't make it through Parliament, and we are just going to be facing an impasse?
We'll go on through the night. It'll be a very difficult negotiation. I think it's much too early to call it either one way or the other. It's going to be difficult, and if he has to take extra time, he may have to take extra time. I know he's very committed, and understandably so, that the deal has got to be all carved up by the end of the month, but it may not be possible to do that. But the issue of extension, remember, you don't extend without unanimity. That's going to have to be made by heads of government. Take the Polish elections overnight. We're now seeing Poland coming back with a strong government. And one thing that Polish government doesn't want is to have a system where the EU can go behind the back of a sovereign nation. And therefore, when people say that Boris hasn't got any cards up his hands, I think he does. I think there will be some governments which will say an extension will only be given if that's what the British government want. They're not in the business of playing ducks and drakes with British politics, and at least they shouldn't be.
And yet, of course, Jean-Claude Juncker, the European Commission President, only for another couple more weeks till the end of October. But he has made it very clear, said quite clearly, if the government asks for an extension, there will be an extension.
Yes, it's not his decision, and he may not like that, but it has to be a unanimous decision of all 27 countries. And we have friends, but we also have people who instinctively want to respect a sovereign government and the authority of the elected government, and therefore are already, I think, pretty apprehensive about going behind people's backs. They've been negotiating with the Labour Party, negotiating with the Liberals. They've been all sorts of chicanery have been going on, and that's not good for the EU long term. And respecting the elected government of the day, as long as they're there, that's the primary responsibility of intelligent government in the EU. And I think some of these are not going to say this can be just automatically done because of a very strange bill passed, the Benn Act in the House of Commons, by a whole load of chicanery. It should never have been allowed to have been passed by the Speaker.
What do you think the motivations of the EU are now? Because obviously people have always said on the Leave side, and I was one of those saying this, of course the Germans and the French might argue about us, don't leave the EU, we're big contributors, but at the end of the day they want to keep free trade with us because they trade more with us than, send more to us than we send to them, in which case it's in their interest to keep free trade, and eventually sense will prevail. But there does seem to be this very strong urge to either stop us from leaving or at the very least punish us for leaving the European Union project, and sort of it's almost like we've somehow betrayed the European Union. What's the motivation of the EU right now? Do you think they are desperate for us to stay in and to want to stay? Do you think they just want to humiliate us? Do you think they do want a deal?
Let's leave the emotional words. Reality is the issue. Germany is very powerful. A fifth of German exports of cars come to this country, and they also make more profit on it than most other countries. We're heading into a very difficult economic circumstances. It looks as if Germany may go into recession. There are going to be very, very real worries about having a breakdown in talks. They don't want a no deal. Nobody wants a no deal, but that must be held on the table, and we must negotiate strongly but intelligently. And that means taking account of a lot of things. You know, America could well put up a tax on German cars coming into the United States. They let them in at the moment on 6%. We charge their cars 10%. Putting it up to 10 is also, we lost the issue of subsidizing Eurobus. There are going to be charges on that. There are a lot of things out there which are very unattractive coming up at Europe. The Eurozone is not in good shape. So Britain holds its nerve, negotiates toughly but fairly, and if it has to go to an extension, let it be an extension which the British Prime Minister asks for.
You
not
don't
one
think
imposed
that
on him.
even as a Brexiteer, you think that Boris Johnson should, on Saturday, the 19th, this coming Saturday, so-called Super Saturday, he should ask for that extension?
No, I think he should negotiate on the basis of let's get this all wrapped up. Let's get it wrapped up by the end of this month. It's in your interests and our interests, and get a settlement. The Irish issue, however, is a very sensitive and difficult issue, and the changes have come forward only in the last 4 or 5 days. It may be genuinely difficult to get a settlement, but they'll go through the night. They also stop the clock. That's another EU technique, which is actually sometimes useful. I've watched them negotiate over 40 years, and I think they mostly want a deal with us. They realize the underlying emphasis in this country, not just the referendum, but since the referendum, people want out of the EU. They don't want us to go, but I think they've accepted we're going. They want us to go in goodwill.
Are you sure about that? Because it seems to me, certainly, maybe other EU 27 leaders might recognise that, but the European Commission seems to constantly, whether it's Guy Verhofstadt, Donald Tusk, or Jean-Claude Juncker, or indeed Michel Barnier, perhaps the most diplomatic, as you'd expect, of those four, constantly making statements about how the people of Britain want to remain and talking about second referendums.
Yes, they're
and
totally against it. And this is their technique. They've used this twice on Ireland. They used it on the Danes. That where they had referendums which they didn't like, they first of all delayed, and then eventually they forced a second referendum. Now, we know the parties and the political parties are all manoeuvring. We've got to have an election. This is a dreadful parliament. It can't make up its mind. And so there's going to have to be a general election. But now they are using the fixed-term parliament, and before we know where we are, we're going to be told there's going to be some sort of crazy linkage of a new government taking us through. They're afraid of an election. But I think ultimately there's no doubt that common sense says we're going to have an election, and the sooner the better. And then let's hope it is decisive. It can take decisions. But in the moment, I don't think there is going to be any enthusiasm for an early election, certainly from either the Labour Party or maybe the Liberals would see advantage in an election. The SNP are the ones who want an election. They are gung-ho to get one, and they think they'll do very well out of it.
Now, you gave a recent speech at the Cambridge Union on also the state of politics, the present state of politics in the UK. I would say it could go on for some years, that speech, not just a few pages. But in it, you outlined your plan for Brexit. And this is something you have been putting forward, something you are urging Theresa May to do, and something that can still be done right now. Explain, if you can, what this plan would be.
I've been openly in favour of a transition through the European Economic Area.
Now explain what that is.
Not staying permanently like Norway and Iceland, staying for a transitional period, and you then decide when you go out, because all you have to do is 12 months' notice. Now, we have not given 12 months' notice to leave the EEA, and it would be perfectly possible and sensible if we get really deadlocked for Boris Johnson to say, well, we'll go out through the EEA. A lot of his own party hate it, but it's a simple way of going out, and you don't require any legislation.
Okay, now just to explain, this is the European Economic Area Agreement,
yes,
and this is the EU, is all EU countries and
plus
Norway.
3 others who are outside the EU. So you can be a member of the EEA. We sign up as Britain.
Free trade.
Yes, and you are allowed to carry on free trade, and this is a option open for us. Mostly people have left the EEA to join the EU, and therefore they've left EFTA. We'd be asking to go into the EFTA pillar of governance, not with the ECJ, stay in there for a transition, a year, 2 years, 3 years, and when it suits us, leave, which we have our right to do, And it might be a smoother way of doing it. It doesn't require any legislation.
This is the key thing. It doesn't require legislation, but also it doesn't require the agreement of the other side. And that's always been a problem with Article 50.
Exactly.
It effectively, we're asking for the agreement of the other side.
I've always wanted a negotiation where you can dictate the terms in a way, and the Norway option for us at this moment allows us to say we will leave, but we will become an non-EU member. At the moment we're an EU member, we become a non-EU member. If they refused it, which I think it would be very difficult for them to do, we would go to arbitration and we go to the Vienna courts, which is an arbitrational procedure which is basically upholding international treaties. It's a very viable exit. It's not like by the hard exiters, the people who generally want to leave without a deal. I would leave without a deal with extreme reluctance, and I think it's some way down the track, and Parliament has virtually put a block on that. This option of going out through the EEA, of which we're a member because Britain signed, nothing to do with the EU, offers a sensible way through. People will not like it. It will be the last option that Boris has, and he will only use it, if he's wise, when all other options are closed. But it allows us to honour the referendum. And we're getting to a state where there is a growing feeling in the country, and this is reflected in the Brexit Party, that this Parliament and the elite in London will not accept a referendum result, that there is a phony democracy. They say they will, but when it comes to the crunch, they're using every possible means to stop it. Take my old constituency, Plymouth. 60-40 voted coming out. This isn't even in the north with the reason why. There's a revolt against London out in the country. And if we are not careful and we don't listen to these voices, it will be a much more extreme grouping that come to Parliament.
And do you think that not just electorally, are you surprised? I mean, given what we've seen, say, in France, the Gilets jaunes on the streets and the violence we've seen there week after week, running battles with the police, are you surprised that people in Britain haven't resorted to violence and street protests on a regular basis when 3.5 years on their vote hasn't actually been implemented?
No, because I think the British people, a few hundred years ago, we'd have taken to the streets with violence, but that was knocked out of our system. We have a underlying faith, I think, in democracy and basically in Parliament. It's the parliamentarians that are taxing people's commitment to it, but it's still there. And if you talk to people who vote Brexit, they now have a much more effective organisation, the new Brexit Party, and they did extremely well in the last European elections.
And as someone who started his own party, the SDP, you know about these things.
I watched the way that they have developed and the way that they have, and they will be a very serious challenge, not just to the Tory party, and the Tories know that, but the Tories, which used to be very well disciplined, have now become a rabble, frankly. They've had to have imposed discipline, and this time, if there was to be a rebellion, I think Boris Johnson would put it on the people who are the Brexiteers. Previously, it was the people who were basically the closet Remainers. But politics is under great strain and stress at the moment, and I must say I'm quite horrified the way the House of Commons behaved. Never has it been anything like this complete incapacity to make a decision. And they're held in contempt outside London.
Just finally, time sadly is against us. If there were a second referendum, a lot of people are saying that's a lot more likely. Just in one word, who's going to win?
Well, I'm so appalled by the thought of a second referendum. For example, it would legitimise Scotland having one soon. I think it would probably be one, but I hope and pray we don't use it. It would be very divisive.
One by leave.
And deeply damaging. We should not have another referendum. You have a binary referendum. They all said that we would honour this referendum, all the prime ministers lining up now against it, except for Boris Johnson. He's in a difficult position. I think we've got to trust him to negotiate well in Brussels, and I think he will.
Let's talk to Tobias Ellwood. He's the former Defence Minister, Conservative MP, about, well, all things, I suppose, Westminster. Good morning to you, Tobias.
Good morning.
Good
Yes,
morning.
it's certainly a big week here.
It's certainly, well, we've been calling it a crunch week, and we're all saying, well, what's going to be decided on Super Saturday? We're almost sort of leaving the Queen's speech behind, and a sort of like, oh, well, it's almost irrelevant because people don't think the Queen's speech is going to be voted through next week, and everyone has got all their eyes on what's happening on this Saturday, Super Saturday. But I have a funny feeling things perhaps aren't going to move forward. We will talk a little bit about the Queen's speech, but first of all, Michel Barnier, the EU's chief negotiator, has said this morning after briefing other EU leaders about how those negotiations are going. He said that it is difficult, but it is still possible that there will be a Brexit deal this week. He said an agreement must work for everyone, and we need to turn good intentions into legal text. We still haven't got much information about what exactly the Prime Minister's deal offering is. Do you know what it is?
I don't, and I'm pleased I don't know the details just yet. These are technical details, mostly focused on Northern Ireland. We know there's been a sticking point. What I'm pleased about is after 3 years, you've got both key stakeholders. You've got Parliament looking to want to support the deal, so the mathematics to get that through. And then you've got the EU saying, possibly we could get this deal. We've not had the planets aligning in that way until this last sort of week or so. So the fact that we've not heard anything, the fact that they're still talking, this is actually good news.
Yeah, I mean, certainly people will say it's good news, and that actually, if we're talking is going to be better than not talking in terms of getting a deal. But big question marks about what sort of deal is on the table. We know that Arlene Foster, the DUP leader, and others met with Boris Johnson in Number 10 last night. A big mistake of Theresa May, of course, was to try and get a deal over the line without actually bothering to show it to Arlene Foster. And what a surprise, got a phone call in the middle of one of those meetings and being told, no, we won't sign up to this. You yourself voted Remain, but you say you'd be happy to vote for a deal. You'd be very much not in favour of no deal. You're not a member of the government because of that concern. But there'll be a lot of leavers, and I must say I'm among them, who's worried that there's now so much fear of the Conservative government falling and you being damaged in the next general election if it comes soon. That there's too much about party politics going on rather than the urge to actually deliver a proper Brexit. And that a deal might be done, which is, to all intents and purposes, the withdrawal agreement heated up with a little bit more of a fudge over the Northern Irish border, and we're just back where we started from with the former Prime Minister Theresa May's withdrawal agreement.
I think you've summed it up perfectly. The trouble is that people have voted how they voted 3 years ago. They seem very wedded to that position or have altered their position. Their positions have been entrenched, and nobody's going to get that perfect outcome. But 100% of us will have to live with whatever we end up with. So there has to be some form of compromise. You say that reminded people that I voted for Remain. But I now realise from a democratic perspective, you have to honour the referendum itself. But ultimately, you have to also have a relationship with Europe. In Bournemouth, we have JP Morgan. They employ 7,000 people there. That company, that firm, needs to have a relationship with Europe. They need to be able to transfer data. If we end up going for no deal, that data agreement suddenly stops overnight. That's just one simple example of how we do need to continue a relationship with Europe. We simply cannot run away. And you're right to point to the Northern Ireland issues. This is tricky. This is complex. This is about how a small, medium, or large-sized business is able to do business across the island of Ireland. Those people who have been there will be aware of how that economy is so integral to each other, to both sides of the border. We mustn't allow anything to threaten the Belfast Agreement, which has allowed relative peace to endure since then.
Yeah, there are many people fear that actually this is just being used as a political football by both the Republic of Ireland, the EU, and those Remainers in Parliament wish to stop it. The reality is, though, we could end up seeing a deal at the end of the week, still possible, as Michel Barnier says, and that European Council meeting Thursday and Friday, and Boris Johnson walks away with some outline of a deal, if not all the finalities of it. And then we've got Super Saturday, we've got Parliament sitting on Saturday, we've also got the deadline for the 9th of October for the Ben Act, the so-called Surrender Act, in which Boris Johnson has to ask for that extension. It is perfectly feasible that he could get a deal and then that deal be voted down by Parliament. We know the SNP, the Liberal Democrats, they say they won't vote for it. Jeremy Corbyn has said he'd have to see the text, but we know he's not going to whip his MPs to vote for it. Even with Eurosceptics voting for that deal, even with the DUP, even with a few Labour Remainers, it'd still be touch and go getting that over the line.
You're absolutely right. The numbers here are very, very tight indeed. I've actually been working with some of my colleagues to speak to Labour. If you have a minority government, if you don't have the numbers, the only way you can possibly get any legislation through, Brexit or otherwise, is by throwing the net wider across the aisle to the other side. And you're right to point out that Labour, Jeremy Corbyn in particular, is not interested in actually getting a deal or doing what's best for the nation. He's trying to be a political opportunist, trying to do as much damage, cause harm to the government itself. Thankfully, there are about 25 Labour MPs that are in Brexit-facing seats that have said, right, we will put nation first. We'll recognise the referendum. We'll recognise that this is actually part one of leaving the EU. This is just the transition. Part two, the deal, the actual relationship itself, if it's Canada Plus or Norway or whatever, that actually comes later. So let's just get us through into this transition period, and then we can have further talks to confirm the detail of the relationship with Europe.
Well, we shall wait and see what happens there. In terms of the Queen's speech yesterday, we had 26 different bills, but 7 of them on law and order, bills about things as wide as the environment. We were talking to a former minister about that, and indeed about agriculture and trade and goodness knows what. But the reality is, this is a government that has got not just a no majority, it's got a minus majority. There's no way in the world that this Queen's speech is going to go through. What was the point of going through all that pomp and circumstance, and indeed huge cost to the taxpayer of having a ceremony for the Queen's speech when we're going to get an election in a matter of weeks or months, and we know that none of these measures are going to get through Parliament?
Well, one of the reasons why the Queen's speech sort of comes here is actually it's almost like the start of school again. We have new work to then do. We have a new assignment, new syllabus, if you like. We had run out of the previous syllabus, and that's why we needed Her Majesty to come here and actually to announce the bills themselves, the intentions. And you're right, I suspect we will have a general election sometime soon. But that should not prevent certainly the government, the Conservative Party, spelling out what it would actually like to do, its intention to invest in our infrastructure, improving our train networks, improving our digital capability, more police on the front line. These are things that, whether the Queen's announced them now or indeed in a couple of months' time, will still be the same. They'll be still part of our manifesto, our intention as government. So the time isn't wasted from that perspective. It had to be done, as I say, because we ran out. All the other bills from the previous Queen's speech had been concluded.
Can I also ask you about what's going on in Syria at the current time? As a former defence minister, lots of concerns that the Turkish onslaught in the northeast Syria region, where they're supposed to be creating this supposed safe zone, effectively displacing a huge number of the Kurds, who have now, it appears, called in Assad's forces to protect them. The US President Donald Trump, who gave the green light for the Turkish forces to go in, is now calling for an immediate truce. But as everyone is pointing out, what has happened is exactly what would have been predicted. But the scenario where the Kurds are having to ask for Assad's protection from a NATO ally, does that sit well with you?
Not at all, and I made a lot of noise about this. I'm going to ask for another urgent question today. In just 1 week, we've seen the map of northern Syria redrawn thanks to President Trump's decision to withdraw his own troops, giving the green light for Turkey to move in, to invade another country, to breach UN Charter, a NATO ally now at war with our counter-Daesh ally. SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces, everybody now is aware, they were holding tens of thousands of foreign fighters and jihadist extremists, hardline fighters that cannot be persuaded just to sort of give up unconditionally. And now they're going to be let loose. They're going to be set free. So it undermines all the international efforts to defeat the caliphate in the first place. And not only that, as you say, the SDF are now actually moving themselves to align with President Assad, a regime that we ended up attacking because he used chemical weapons. This has been a dramatic change and I think a mistake by Donald Trump. And I would really like to see Britain do far more to lead the international voices of condemnation against Turkey, to call for arms embargoes, to call for sanctions, to actually hold Turkey to account. I make this point firmly because we talk about the erosion of the rules-based order. If we're not seeking to work with our allies to be able to control what's going on around the world, what message does this send to those people who do want to cause us harm, our adversaries, our competitors, that see that the West will not act when something is tested, when beneath the threshold of the ability to respond? Real concerns for international security, not least for British security as well, because these people will continue to mean us harm.
Another busy day in Parliament today. Busy days all this week in Parliament. That Saturday sitting at the end of the week, sort of looming ahead in what's been dubbed a crunch week. But what is actually going to happen at the end of the week? And what is going to happen with all of the bills, the 26 bills announced in the Queen's speech yesterday? Let's talk to Kate Heavy, who's a Labour MP, Brexiteer, of course, and joins us now. Good morning to you, Kate.
Good morning.
Good morning. I mean, crucially, of course, these people's priorities that the Prime Minister was talking about, dealing with law and order. I mean, there were 7 different bills covering issues of law and order out of those 26 draft pieces of legislation. None of this is even going to see the light of day before a general election, is it? Because there's no doubt at all that the Prime Minister, he hasn't got a majority. He's not going to get his Queen's speech through Parliament next week.
Well, in a normal situation, this would have been quite an interesting group of bills, and there would have been a lot of discussion on the individual ones and certain ones that I like better than others. But the reality is the Prime Minister does not have the majority, and to get any of this through, even the ones that people would be broadly supportive across party, because of course many people in Parliament will be wanting to play politics, in a sense, with a silly expression, but wanting to make an issue of this, because in what is the crucial issue at the moment, of course, is what's going to happen at the weekend, and whether we are actually going to get an arrangement with the European Union that will allow us to leave on October the 31st. And all of Parliament is just coalescing around that issue. So the whole Queen's speech idea probably was very cleverly used as an opportunity for the Prime Minister and for the Conservative Party to put forward issues that will be then come part of a general election, which eventually we will have to have.
Exactly. This was it was all about electioneering rather than what's immediately going to happen. Well, we know that the UK has put in sort of a fresh text, we're told, to the EU this morning with fresh proposals. We know there was a meeting between the Prime Minister and Arlene Foster and other DUP MPs at Number 10 last night. Very different tactics from what Theresa May has done in the past, where trying to basically present a deal as a done deal, and then having the DUP, who at that time were propping up her government with their 10 MPs, saying, I don't think so. Michel Barnier, the EU's chief negotiator, this morning after briefing other EU 27 leaders, has said that he thinks that a deal, it's going to be difficult to get it over the line this week, but it is still possible. That's quite positive coming from Michel Barnier. He's been perhaps one of the most negative in his public comments so far. But are you concerned that we've had another fresh text? Because from what we know, most of the information we've had about what's involved in this proposal has come through the Irish media, who their close contacts with the Irish Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar, over the last couple of days. But are you concerned that there does seem to be just constant movement by the UK and not by the EU? Because we've seen the EU not move, as far as I can tell, a single inch in the last 3.5 years.
I think the Prime Minister and the first ideas of what had changed seemed to have been a compromise that, if presented in the right way and looking at the detail, many people who would prefer a clean Brexit could go along with in order to get us out. But I think he really has very, very little room for manoeuvring to compromise even more, and especially on the Irish border, Northern Ireland issue, because since the move by the DUP last week to look at ways of being able to perhaps accept some form of checks at the sea border with Great Britain, that has not gone down well at all within Northern Ireland. And so I think there's a very, very limited chances of any more compromising. And I think probably now we're in a situation where both sides probably feel that, yes, they could get an arrangement, but more likely there may well not be, and they want to make sure that they're not going to be the ones that are blamed, because there will be a lot of EU countries, despite wanting to keep together and stick together as the EU 27, they will not want to see this fail, and there will be retribution, I would imagine, in terms of blame. And I think the Prime Minister is very, very keen. That's why he's been doing so much discussing with people, meeting people completely different from Theresa May. Yeah. It just makes you think that if only we'd had a different Prime Minister early on, we might not be in this position now. And I just feel that we're we just have to make sure that at the end of it, if we are leaving, we leave properly. And there's no point in rushing things now and saying, oh, well, if we give this little bit more, we might just get a deal. We've got to make sure that it's right for the future of the country. And so some of the things that in the Queen's speech, of course, were very important issues. And we would need to be getting onto that, but we're not going to get onto it if we don't get the right deal.
And this is the thing, isn't it? But in terms of how much politics is coming into this, there will be, Boris Johnson. He's not just got an eye on delivering Brexit; he's got an eye on winning the next general election, and he knows the threat he's got from the Brexit Party is going to be the one thing that's going to stop him from getting that splitting of the Leave vote, getting a majority government next time round. We also know that Labour, Jeremy Corbyn, he doesn't want to give Boris Johnson a last-minute victory of a deal. He knows that would be disastrous for him. He can say it's a Tory Brexit. It's not as good as we'd get. He's not going to want that. We know a lot of those Remain MPs, they're not afraid of no deal. They just don't want Brexit at all. There is a certain feeling now where actually Parliament is at the point where perhaps some of the Brexiteers have gone, well, all right, then we'll come together on this. They're now seeing the Remainers thinking, well, we're smelling blood. We think we're going to get the possibility of an extension, possibility of no Brexit at all, possibility of a second referendum, a general election that clears out Boris Johnson. So they're not going to vote for it. So even if we do get a deal, the chances of getting a deal which will actually pass muster in the House of Commons, it must be close to zero.
I think you're right. I think there are opposition parties who, whatever was in that arrangement, if the Prime Minister came back with a wonderful, wonderful deal, they would still find a way of voting against it because they don't want us to leave and they want to make life as difficult as possible. And I think that's why in the end, it's such a... I'm so annoyed about the Ben bill because the Ben bill really has stifled what the Prime Minister could do, which would have been to say, well, look, you're not going to pass this deal. You don't want, well, then we are just simply leaving. And of course, that at the moment, unless they find some clever way around it, stops that happening. So we will see on Saturday, I think, and again, it just seems ludicrous to having this special day on Saturday. What's so special about waiting to Monday? Just, another way of kind of hyping everything up. We will see people trying to, again, thwart and frustrate. And in my view, Parliament, yes, Parliament's important, but this was a decision made by the British people. And the British people now are being thwarted in what they voted for by a Parliament that is made up of people who never wanted us to leave and could not believe that people had gone against what they said would be in their best interest.
Well, there are a couple of things I wanted to ask you about, and we'll move on to the football. As a former sports minister, I'm sure you've got something to say about that match last night. But first up, this call for there to be a requirement for voter ID for people going to vote, to cast their ballot, to actually show voter ID, to identify who they are, of concerns about electoral fraud been going on. We have seen some specific allegations, Tower Hamlets, places like Peterborough, that recent by-election. But we're often told by the Labour Party, look, this is, Jeremy Corbyn and others on the front bench speaking out about this, saying this is simply about voter suppression. This is out of the Republican playbook in America, where you effectively make it hard for people who are unlikely to vote Tory to vote. What would you say to that?
Oh, it's complete and utter nonsense. It was a Labour government that brought in a photo ID in Northern Ireland back in 2003. That has worked perfectly satisfactorily. It's not a passport you need or a driving licence or anything that's expensive. They're given everyone can get a free ID at their local council. You can use your bus pass. You can use something else that is has a photograph on it. And, I have to go and get a parcel the other week from the post office, and I had to show some kind of ID. It's just a nonsense, the idea. It's also very patronising, I think, of what Labour Party call poor people, that somehow, because you're not particularly well off, that you will be put off voting because you might have to show some kind of identity. It is a nonsense, and I hope the government actually could persist with this, because it would be a very sensible solution. And then I think we also need to look at the way our postal voting system works, because that clearly has been abused. it doesn't really matter who's abused it, it's been abused, and it needs to be sorted. So I'm very happy with that piece of legislation, and I hope we can get Brexit so we can get on with getting that into.
Yes, indeed. Let's ask about the football, though. In the last few moments, some breaking news regarding that match, that 6-0 defeat from England and Bulgaria. Of course, no one's really talking about the result. More talking about the horrible racist chanting and the Nazi salutes going on from the very few Bulgarians allowed into the stadium. But the Bulgarian Prime Minister in the last few minutes has called for the head of the Bulgarian Football Union to resign. There's a lot of pressure also on UEFA for not taking enough action, not ending the match. What do you think should have happened, and what would you want to happen now?
Well, I think there was a step forward last night, that at least there was some kind of action taken during the match. But I think in a situation that was so blatant, and the idea that the Bulgarian manager said he'd heard nothing was just so silly. I would have liked to have seen the match. I think it would have sent a real shockwave if the match had been stopped. But I think UEFA now need to step in, and certainly Bulgaria need to be probably told that they can no longer take part in the rest of this tournament. Perhaps have to play with closed doors. Nobody allowed to watch for the next few matches, and they've got to try and sort this out, because it is just shocking. But I think what's been great was the reaction of our team and our players and our manager, and that really shows that when people keep united, this kind of disgraceful behaviour can be stopped and can certainly be challenged.
Owen Patterson, who joins us now. Good morning to you, Owen.
Hello, Julia.
Good morning. You were quoted as saying that you thought that what you'd seen of this proposed deal so far was absurd and unacceptable. What have you seen of the text of the deal, of the proposals so far from the UK side that makes you say that?
Well, I didn't actually. That was a misquote. If you look at the piece which has been put on Conservative Home, I've said it would be absurd to revive Mrs May's deal, which only got 8.8% in the European elections when the Conservatives were the only party standing defending it. We came fifth. So I very much welcome the fact that Boris has set out a very clear destination of a wide-ranging free trade agreement, which, of course, we were offered by President Tusk way back in March 2018, and that is the obvious destination to get to. But where we are with the negotiations, none of us know. I know no more than you do. Cat Collins did Downing Street yesterday. Nobody's got any detail. But I do think it's really important we don't just reheat the May deal and make the same mistakes, because it will be defeated again, as been.
And yet there's a lot of concern that things couldn't be moving this quickly in such a short space of time, even though there's a possibility, if there was a deal that people said in principle they were happy with a couple more weeks, we'd have to stay in to finalise the legal text and the like. But the idea is that there couldn't be any sort of deal other than what was already on the table in terms of the withdrawal agreement. You're saying, though, that as much as you do know, you think this is more about, say, this free trade agreement. And again, as a Brexiteer, that's all I want. Let's just have a free trade deal. Thank you very much. Treat us the same as Canada. Let's carry on as we were, but we're in charge of how our country is run. That's what I think most leavers would be very happy with. But how sure can you be this isn't just going to be a reheated withdrawal agreement, but with, as someone saying last night, a blonde wig on?
Well, I generally don't know. But I entirely endorse what you said. And I did say, and the piece of Telegraph at the end of last week, there's a certain point we say enough is enough. We all knew these negotiations would come to a crunch. People talk about the 11th discussion on the steps of the courthouse, and it was always going to go to the wire. But I think you've got to remember, 17.4 million people voted to leave. We made it very clear in our election manifesto we would leave the customs union, we'd leave the single market, we'd leave the remit of the European Court of Justice, and we said very clearly on page 36 that no deal is better than a bad deal. And those people are absolutely exasperated. And you're now seeing real damage now. The delays and the constant drama of this has really got to be brought to a head. So my view today, signing up the Brexit pledge, is if we really cannot get a deal through these negotiations, we have to say, fine, we're going to offer you a free trade agreement. We can do that on GATT terms that can be temporary, tied over period, during which we have all the current arrangements, zero tariffs and zero quotas continue. But we've really got to say enough is enough and bring this to a head now. We cannot dribble on with an extension. We cannot dribble on to January or whatever.
And yet, of course, again, even that would surely have to get some sort of agreement in the House of Commons. It's quite clear. The number 10 are basically saying they're going to whip any vote if a deal is brought forward, and if Tory rebels, if they don't go along with a whip and vote for a deal, then they will lose the whip. Could possibly in an upcoming general election, along with those other 21 rebels last time around, they could end up not being allowed to stand again. Likewise, on the Labour side, they basically said, I mean, it's quite clear, and political game playing on both sides, no doubt, that Labour is saying, look, it's going to be a Tory Brexit deal. We don't want that deal. It's not going to happen. The only chance of any deal getting through could be a slight chance if there were a promise of a second referendum to confirm that deal was acceptable to the British people. Would you, if there was a deal that you thought was acceptable, if the only condition for getting that through was to have a second referendum to confirm it, but the choice was, say, remain or that deal, would you be willing to sign up to that?
I think a second referendum would be very damaging. I really wouldn't want to sign up to that at all or vote for it. You're basically saying, you lot, 17.4 million people, of which I suspect you may have been one, I definitely was one, we voted to leave. But you got it wrong, the established know better, you're thick, you're stupid, you didn't listen to our very grown-up arguments with the establishment. We're going to rerun this again, and that's what your opinion did in Ireland. They did it in Denmark.
No. If it was a deal, the actual deal on the table, then would you argue for that at all? You still think you still the same premise? You would still say it was unacceptable?
Yeah, we have, for the first time in our history, we have a complete clash between direct democracy, a referendum, which where the people were told you will make the decision, and whatever you decide, Parliament will implement, and parliamentary democracy, where we hand over sovereignty to MPs for a period of 4 or 5 years. And there's a straightforward clash. I personally think, for the integrity of all our institutions, it is absolutely essential that we deliver what the 17.4 million people voted for. You cannot say that you will vote for something, okay, and then, oh, by the way, these clever clogs establishment MPs, who are much more superior to you, will actually decide whether you got it right or not. And if you got the wrong answer, right, we'll come back to you again.
Okay, let's move on from that then. A cabinet meeting is going to be held at 4:00 today, we're told, and Boris Johnson apparently prepared to fly to Brussels to get the deal over the line. He says, and we know that there is going to have to be something effectively agreed, at least in principle, before the European Council starts tomorrow. If he can get that deal over the line, will it require the support of the DUP and the so-called Spartans, the European Research Group? Those MPs who refused to vote for the withdrawal agreement that Theresa May brought 3 times. Is it going to require those votes, or is it possible for him to get this over the line with the likes of Stephen Kinnock and another 20 or so Labour rebels who may well defy a Corbyn whip on the basis that they think that there'll be a general election soon anyway, and that they can vote with the government? Do you think there actually are enough people who want a deal of any kind, just to avoid a no-deal Brexit, or indeed a second referendum or whatever, that actually there will be enough votes to get this a deal of some kind over the line, even without the staunch Eurosceptics agreeing to it?
Oh, I think it's obvious, given the arithmetic and people who've lost the whip and have resigned from the party and everything, the government will need every single vote it can from its own side and from the DUP. And I think many of us are longing to get this behind us, but we've got to wait and see the details of the deal, and the deal has got to fulfil what the people voted for. It's got to deliver taking back control, and leaving the customs union, leaving the single market, and leaving the remit of the European negotiation.
And that's for the whole of the UK, including the Northern Ireland. I mean, that's not going to be possible,
what we don't
is it?
Want is, there's this idea of rhino. You do not want, which we had before. You do not want Brexit name in it, but I think there's a longing across the board. Everyone seems exhausted by this, inside and outside Parliament, and longing to bring it to a conclusion. So I very much hope that these talks are successful. But I cannot obviously comment on the deal because I've seen absolutely nothing, nor has everyone else.
And exactly, and that's the key thing. It does appear that neither does anyone else. Often when the people are keeping the powder dry, perhaps that's a good sign or a bad sign. Who knows? Right now, though, let's talk about Extinction Rebellion. Those activists have been on the street since Monday last week across London, blocking bridges, blocking large parts of Westminster and Parliament Square. They were eventually all moved on, kettled up to Trafalgar Square before the weekend, ahead, of course, the Queen's speech on Monday. But they've now been told yesterday, it's time for you to go. We're bored with you now. Your peaceful protest, still an illegal protest, and it's time for you to leave London's streets. They have now been banned across London from continuing with those protests. However, the Extinction Rebellion activists have said they're planning to defy that protest ban. And even Sadiq Khan, the London mayor, set himself on something of a collision course with the Metropolitan Police as he questioned the decision to basically take a tough stance on those protests. Let's talk to Sakina Sheikh, who's a climate justice activist from an organisation called Platform, not part of Extinction Rebellion, but very much supporting a lot of their aims. Good morning to you, Sakina.
Good morning, Julia.
Good morning.
Thank you for having me back.
Do you think that the police were right to say enough is enough now?
Absolutely not. I mean, I think I am joined by a coalition of MPs, London Assembly members, and institutional human rights bodies like Liberty and Amnesty that say this is a chilling and unlawful decision. I think your news report have quoted it's an unprecedented attack on protests. And I think we should all be seriously concerned about this constitutional creep on our basic human rights. Protesting is, the heart. It's one of our fundamental rights. It's wrapped up within our constitutional rights. And the fact that we've seen the Met Police take this decision and lean on the GLA is extremely worrying.
And yet, of course, there's a constitutional right, a very important right to protest. However, because other people will be affected by protests, there is also a legal requirement that those protests have the permission of the police. It is inevitably given, but often it's given. It's a march for a day. It's a protest where it's not causing major disruption. The police have been, I think, really not heavy-handed enough over 9 days of protests that have disrupted London, disrupted a lot of people going about their lawful, peaceful business. And you say, this is chilling and unlawful. These protests were unlawful. They didn't have the permission of the police to be where they wanted to be. They didn't have the permission. These were illegal protests, largely, but not entirely peaceful. Is it not a bit chilling that people who, because they say they feel passionate about an idea, get to stop other law-abiding citizens going about their personal business?
I mean, I think that the illegal behaviour at the moment is squarely being challenged towards the Met Police. I mean, we literally, within 24 hours, have lawyers working on bringing a judicial review because this is, like I said, we haven't seen such a draconian crackdown on protests before. It is a
draconian crackdown.
Absolutely.
They've had 9 days of disrupting the capital city of this country, and people have been very calmly arrested, picked up very gently by 8 different police officers. Police officers. I mean, we've had police officers at Smithfield telling reporters, "Can they please be quiet because the protesters who are camping out illegally are asleep?" And you're calling that draconian? You're having a laugh, aren't you, Sakina?
No, I think it's actually quite a expected extension of what we've seen is Boris lied to the Queen. He lied to the nation. He has no respect for our constitutional sanctity. And now Preeti Patel...
Sorry, what on earth has this got to do with anything?
Well, I'll explain. Preeti Patel, who's in the Home Office, and many people have said that actually she has been coordinating with the police, because obviously that comes under her remit, to again extend this draconian style of government, one of the most right-wing governments we've seen in a very long time.
Okay, right. Look, Sakina, I know you're a climate protester, so facts probably aren't your thing. There's no way you can describe this. I mean, this is not it's not a particularly right-wing, it's a conservative government, but description of this as a draconian right-wing government is simply, I mean, it's just simply got very little to back that up with. This is not an argument. I mean, are these protests about climate change, or are these protests actually about a Tory government? Which strikes me that a lot of this is what it's about. Because look, you've had the protesters have had their say. They've been on the telly, they've been in the papers, they've been on my radio show and everyone else's radio shows. They've made their point. What purpose is served by them continuing to disrupt people? Or is their argument that we're going to disrupt people unless or until everyone does as we say? Because if we're going to use words like chilling and draconian, I'm thinking those fit very well.
Well, I mean, look, I would welcome you to invite me back in sort of 24 hours when the High Court, the judicial court of our country will be, I think, in consensus that this is illegal behaviour. And, I think just before you had me on, you had the news reporter talking about knife crime and the fact that 4-year-olds are carrying knives and hammers. And I think that one very succinct analysis that has been done by many people is that there is a disconnect and a distrust between young people and the police. And as an institutional body, they were found to be institutionally racist. So I think when you're trying to build back,
years ago,
when you're trying to build back that trust, to see measures like this is bulldozing over any attempt to reconnect and rebuild trust with society.
Hold on a minute. So
This
we
isn't their call,
So we
Julia. This is not their
rebuild
call.
trust between young people and the police by the police not removing people who are carrying out an illegal protest.
The only ones who are going to be declared as behaving illegally this week will be the police. The decision to implement Section 14 is extremely worrying and unprecedented. That's why within 24 hours...
Sakina, the protesters themselves are carrying out illegal protests. They had not have the permission to do those protests and to continue them so long. That's why they're being arrested. If I leave my wheelie bin out on the pavement for a day too long, I'll get fined. I mean, you can't just block pavements and roads and put a camp up and just move in wherever you darn well feel like it.
But we both know it's a constitutional basic right. That's what one of the brilliant things of our democracy
protest,
is,
but it doesn't.
right?
No. But you don't have a right to protest 365 days a year, however you want, whenever you want, and just say, because I feel strongly about this, everyone has to agree with me and do what I'm telling them to do, unless or until they do. I'm going to continue. That's not a democracy in operation.
Banning protest across London is nothing
They've
short
banned...
of
No,
draconian.
they haven't banned protest across London. They have banned the Extinction Rebellion, the organisation that has held 9 days, 24 hours of protest across London, saying enough is enough, you've had your say, now we're going to get London moving. That's not banning protest.
Do you know what I find particularly worrying, actually, and I haven't had a chance to mention this yet, is the dynamic between the Metropolitan Police that reports to the GLA and then the City of London Police. And actually the initial decision to ban protests by XR in central London was taken by the City of London. It's this sort of quarter-mile...
They want to keep the city going, yeah.
And no, actually, if you look globally, Julia, they have disproportionate levels of... emissions wrapped up in that 1 square mile of London.
They're not disproportionate. This is where all the big companies are, and big companies tend to often do things like are involved with fossil fuels.
Exactly.
It's not. This is not a logical sort of shock to anybody.
I think you've hit the nail on the head. BP and Shell, who call their home within that City of London square mile, of course they don't want protests. They don't want people flagging up the fact that they are burning the planet. We've got... But
they're not, okay, they're not burning the planet. They're producing the fossil fuels that we use to run our country. They're producing... they're probably the sort of companies that produce the goods that allow you to be on a mobile phone right now speaking to me, because those precious metals have to come from somewhere and the manufacturing process has to happen, and then that good has to be shipped all the way here to the UK. Every single thing that you are doing in your day-to-day will involve some of those fossil fuels.
And I say to BP and Shell and the City of London, this has backfired on you. You have tried to suppress protests and ban protests, and what have you done? You've raised the profile of the fact that our house is on fire and you're trying to...
Okay, and again, I know if you're on the BBC or Sky, they let you say, our house isn't on fire. That has no meaning. There's no science to back up that statement. That is a meaningless slogan, and you know it.
Well, I think the science and the facts disagree.
They don't. Our house, if you mean the planet, is on fire. It's not on fire.
Literally burned. In February, we had...
The Amazon rainforest isn't burning because of climate change. You do know that, don't you?
Tell me about the north of England, the Yorkshire Moors, and in the South Down Forest in February. Why were those burning?
Genuinely, not because of climate change. And I love that everyone in the studio's got their head in their hands. Sakina Sheikh, I do love speaking to you, but goodness me, climate justice activist, whatever that is from Platform. It's painful. It's really painful. You've been very critical online about Sadiq Khan and the fact that he has questioned the police decision, a decision I think very much supported by many in London, fed up with having their commutes affected. What have you had to say?
Well, I've basically said he needs to back the police. I remember when we had the riots, everybody said the police didn't take enough action. Now they are taking action, an action that I fully support, and you'll find that many working ordinary Londoners who need to just get to and fro support as well. They had 9 days of protest. I think that's their point well made. We need to get London moving.
Well, that's the thing. A lot of people are saying, you do have a right to peaceful protest, but of course they say peaceful. We have seen some people gluing themselves to criminal damage. A senior member of the Extinction Rebellion organisation smashing with a hammer a glass front of a building. So not as peaceful as you'd think. But also, crucially, these may be peaceful protests, but they're not legal, are they? You don't have a right to just sit down and put a tent up in the middle of a road and not be moved on.
And beyond not being legal, they're not fair. If you want people to join you in saving the planet, and I have in the last few years become a convert, we do have a climate emergency, let's do something about it. This is not the way to go about it.
Why do you think we've got a climate emergency?
Because, look, we have lots of things going on with sea levels, whatever, and whatever side of the debate you're on, you certainly want clean air as well. But the point is this isn't about the climate, is it? It's about London. It's about allowing people to get to work. I went to the Westminster demonstration very early on. It was nice and good-natured. I spoke to someone about single-use plastics, but whilst I was there, I came across a guy who was lugging his his mitre saw, across the bridge. And his words to me was, 2 weeks of this nonsense, what am I going to do? I need to get paid. His mates had booted him out of the van because they couldn't get any closer. That's who I'm focused on. How do we get to work? And again, if you're going to make a protest, fine, but you can't just close London down for 2 weeks because it suits you.
Well, the interesting thing, of course, today, in the last few minutes, the Extinction Rebellion have begun their protests on the tube, so on the London Underground. So, okay, so, basically, so people not using cars, people using public transport to get to and from work. We've seen protests in the past on the Doctors Light Railway. Now, they've actually seen some very, very angry scenes in Canning Town in East London, where people were Extinction Rebellion protesters standing on top of trains, stopping trains moving. Huge crowds of people on the platforms, very, very angry. And actually, we've seen angry commuters basically jumping onto the top of the trains, dragging those protesters off the top of the train and pushing them down. Now, they have, since some of them were attacked, some very angry scenes, not endorsing that. I have to say, dragging them off the top of the trains, fully in favour, personally, as a commuter. People trying to get to their jobs. A lot of people bearing in mind now, they're not on staff jobs. They don't get to work. They get to work on time. They don't get paid. As simple as that. But it looks to me like the Londoners are taking things into their own hands now. But part of that will be because they don't feel that the authorities and the police are on their side. There's a lot of shh, can you keep quiet because the protesters are asleep in their tents.
But this is what I'd say. I'd say the authorities are on their side, and the action that the police took shows you that the police are on their side. The person who's not on their side...
It took a long time for the police to be on their side.
The police are even-handed. They did their bit, and when they moved, they were decisive. The person who's not on their side is Sadiq Khan. Where is he? He's been very silent, and it feels to me like he's invited this problem, because what you'll see now, we've just talked about anguish scenes at Canning Town, but I bet you'll see them everywhere. And now we're talking about things about people's safety, not only normal commuters, but also Extinction Rebellion members as well. This is about safety. This is about keeping London moving. It's about leadership. Sadiq Khan needs to step up and do his job.
In reality, a lot of people are losing patience with these protests, even people who do believe there is a climate emergency, for which there is no scientific evidence. The climate change, yes. For need for us to take action, yes. Climate emergency, the language being used is totally hyperbolic and not actually backed up by the science or backed up by the IPCC reports, which I think we're supposed to be looking at the science. But a lot of people who are very supportive are losing patience, aren't they? Do you think that actually Extinction Rebellion's protest, they may feel, well, they're on the front page of the papers, they're in the news, we're discussing it right now, giving them publicity, but actually they'll have turned an awful lot of people off?
There's no doubt they'll turned a lot of people off. And this morning I was on a train and I was telling people I was coming on your show, and they asked me what about, and I said about Extinction Rebellion, and a number of people on my carriage said it's got nothing to do with the environment, Sean. These people want political power and want to go outside of our sort of democratic system. And I think the more they misbehave, the more their demands become wild and all over the place, this will be people's conclusion, and they'll lose the good kernel that they have, and people just focus on A, their poor behaviour, and B, their idea that they can bring London to a standstill just because it suits them is ridiculous, and C, they'll just lose any focus on their environmental push, which some people have a great deal of sympathy for, including me.
He needs a big Leave majority in order to see this through to a decent form of Brexit. That's what he needs. And at the moment, it's hard to see how he secures that. Let's see what happens over the next few days. Let's see if he gets it through tomorrow. It's clearly going to be very, very close.
And you mentioned this second referendum, people's vote, confirmatory vote. I mean, they just call it what they want, but it never seems to have a no-deal option on the table. I'd be very happy to have a second referendum with a Boris's deal or a no-deal Brexit and let the British people decide. But there's no way a referendum is going to be organised in this country by the MPs, the Remain majority in the House of Commons, unless it's got Remain on it, and they won't allow no deal on it either. In which case, is that the next big battle?
It could well be, and if so, then we will be ready for it. We've no doubt about that. We've already started to think about how that would play out. No, look, we'll be ready for that battle. Equally, if there's a general election, then we'll work out what's the right thing to do in order to get a big thumping Leave majority. Because it's only by having a big Leave majority at a general election that a proper Brexit deal, a future trade deal, can be secured and negotiated. Because you've got to always have the confidence and the ability to walk away from the table. At least this deal does have that potential to walk away at the end of the transition period if you've got a strong, brave negotiating team. Our real concern is would the Conservatives be prepared to do that? There's a lot of hard work to be done from here on. Let's see what tomorrow brings. Who knows? But there's no question. The mood of the country is: can we get this done? Can we move on? And our view is to get it done. It's got to be done properly. And there's still lots of risks and dangers and traps out there and pitfalls. And our job will be to hold the Conservatives to account to avoid that.
Whose votes do you think you can count on? Do you think you can get it through?
We want to draw on all votes right across the Conservative Party, right across the House of Commons, and we'll do it by showing that this is a good deal, pulled off by the Prime Minister, despite all the doubters saying it could never be done. And I think talking about the substance of this deal, we've allayed the fears of those who were worried about no deal. If they want to avoid no deal now, they need to vote for this deal or take responsibility for what comes next. And I haven't heard a clear, coherent or credible plan from anyone who's planning to vote against the deal. And for Brexiteers, we can point to all the positives of this deal. We're going to have total control over our laws. We're going to be able to end free movement and move to a points-based immigration system. And we're free to chart our course in the world with global free trade deals. So this is win-win-win. And I think that actually it will focus minds on the lack of, for all John McDonnell has been talking about this morning, or Jeremy Corbyn, they've got no plan. They want to see us stuck in the mud because that allows them to exploit the situation for political purposes. I think there'll be a lot of Labour MPs who see through that and who are conscious of the promises that they've made on Brexit. This is the way, get this deal done, get Britain motoring forward.
Crucial votes there for Boris Johnson in Westminster. You will not be voting for this deal. Tell us why you feel this is a Brexit deal that you cannot support.
Well, I think, first of all, the Prime Minister shouldn't be surprised that we'll not be voting for this deal, which really has the rest of the United Kingdom leaving the European Union and Northern Ireland staying in the European Union in terms of being tied to European regulations and also having a border down the Irish Sea which would require every good which goes into Northern Ireland being subject to customs duties, customs papers having to be submitted, and also then checks within Northern Ireland, rebates for some companies, but causing all kinds of administrative and cash flow problems for them. So it would disadvantage our economy quite seriously. And of course, it's not in keeping with what the Prime Minister promised he would deliver, that the whole of the United Kingdom would leave the EU. And, don't forget, Julia, we did seek to facilitate and give the Prime Minister as much latitude in the negotiations as possible by saying that we would accept for a period regulatory alignment with the EU, but the safeguard would be that the Northern Ireland Assembly would be able to, using the cross-community vote, which is part and parcel of the Good Friday Agreement, would be able to vote to change that arrangement if it was seen to be damaging to the Northern Ireland economy or if alternatively.
Do you feel that you've been sold out?
Well, I do think that he has not honoured the pledges which he made to us, because he sought flexibility from us. We gave him flexibility, and then the other side of the bargain was that he would ensure that Northern Ireland came out on the same terms as the rest of the United Kingdom. He didn't deliver on that, while we delivered on giving him some latitude in the negotiation.
It's a deal to leave, not a deal for the future. We understand that.
Well, I'm glad you say that, because we are told that it is a deal that deals with everything and will get Brexit done. It won't get Brexit done in that sense whatsoever. There'll be still years more uncertainty. And I have to say...
Wait a second, you were about to say it takes 8 years. It takes the EU 8 years to do deals with countries with whom they don't already have... No, but this is the thing. We're always told it takes years and years to do deals. It takes years to do deals because...
It will take... Well, I've been told by EU officials and also people who actually attend the European Council meetings that it will take at least 3 years to do. Nobody thinks that it will take any less time than that. And the problem that we've got is we therefore are currently, all we've done is really extend the gangplank, because the implementation period, which would kick in after any withdrawal agreement were passed, if it is passed, I don't think it will be, finishes at the end of next year. So all of what we're going through now with, will we, won't we leave without all this business, this will all come back yet again at the end of next year. Now, it's great for the media in a way, because it's great copy, the drama, lots to talk about, sells papers, gets people listening to your fantastic programme, Julia. But actually, that isn't a good thing overall for the country. And that's why, I've always been very upfront with you. We want to stop Brexit altogether. If you want to stop this chaos, stop it.
But this is it. You say you've got to stop the chaos. But let's be honest, what would not be a good thing for the country would be to drag this out any further. Look, if you want to have a nice clean break and move on, hey, I'm very happy with the no-deal Brexit, Chuka. But the reality is you want to drag this out and drag out the divisiveness and the anger and the arguments for longer than necessary. You want to have if the Lib Dems got elected, you would just simply revoke Article 50. If you think Brexit's going away like that, I think frankly you need help. But from the many white coats, it's not going away like that. But even with a second referendum, more division, more battling, more years of the country turning on itself.
I'm uncomfortable, as a lot of people are, with the Northern Irish arrangement, but it's workable. It will keep Northern Ireland in the customs union, British customs, UK customs union, which means they can get the benefits of the trade deals we do, but at the same time have an arrangement to keep the European Union happy that they won't see lots of smuggling on the Northern Ireland border. It leaves me uncomfortable. It's probably the best we can do. This is actually one of those issues. It really matters to the country. Quite a lot of what happens in Parliament goes by without people noticing, but this really matters to the country. You're right, we've had 3 years of debate on this. There are no new arguments. The Letwins of the world and the Greaves and so on saying, we need more debate. No, we don't. We've been through every possible thing we can talk about on this. We need to get a decision.
Do you not think that by not putting the support behind this vote that actually we end up having a risk of there being no Brexit at all?
I think the problem is we've had 3 years of Brexit derangement syndrome. Now we've got Brexit fatigue syndrome. I just worry that we're so bored of Brexit, both the public and Parliament, that they just want any deal over the line so they can get on with the rest of their lives. That's my big fear, and that's why this deal doesn't measure up. Now, in terms of what we would like to see happen today, the Letwin amendment, I think, is treacherous, but it may allow parliamentarians the time to go through these documents as we have, at which point they'll realise that maybe it's not such a good deal to vote for after all.
Kill momentum, and some of those Labour defectors will get cold feet, and this is the big problem. We're not used to trade deals in this country. The bottom line is that this sacrifice of sovereignty to the EU and following some of the EU guidelines is what trade deals are all about. And if we want to deal with America, if we want to deal with India, with Brazil, anyone else, there's always the giving up of sovereignty, because that's how trade deals work.
What's your feeling? What's the feeling of your colleagues in the House of Commons right now after that amendment from Oliver Letwin passed?
It's incredibly frustrating. We've basically wasted our entire day, not only us but all the staff here in the Commons who've come in on their day off to facilitate us here. The effect of the amendment effectively means that the Parliament has agreed to not decide and kick the can down the road once again, which for my constituents, 71% of whom voted to leave in Mansfield, means that, again, we've just reneged on our responsibilities as far as I'm concerned. But I'm sure the question will be back again next week.